Hey guys, thank you so much for coming back and for listening to my podcast. This is the Forgotten Working Class podcast. I am Tiffany, the owner of Arcing Ahead Blue Collar Apparel line for men, women, children, families, and friends. As I mentioned in the last episode, I just want to come back on here and give you guys a little bit more backstory before I bring John on and some guest speakers. So if you'd bear with me, it's been a long, crazy 4 years. And as I said, September is his burniversary month. I made a mistake in the last episode and said September 19th. Well, September 19th, he actually has a doctor's appointment for a sleep study. So that's why I said that. I've been getting all kinds of confused, being a backbone, children, husband, all kinds of stuff. But yeah, his burniversary is actually September 18th. September 18th, 2019 is the date of his accident. John was working on the job and he used to go in at all kinds of random hours of the night. So nothing was ever consistent with his schedule. But the only thing that was consistent was he was working 75, 80 hours a week, all overtime. Most of you know how that is. So yeah, the night before, he had gone in at 1 o'clock in the morning, I believe. And at the time, our son was just a little over a year old. And our daughter had just turned 9. We literally just celebrated her 9th birthday the week before. And he was at work. And yeah, 11 o'clock that morning, I was laying on the couch with our son and taking a nap. And I got the call. And it was someone who he worked with saying, John has been hurt. And I said, no, this is a joke. Like, stop. And I hung up. Being half asleep, thought it was a joke. They were playing a prank on me, whatever. Get a call back. No, get up. This is not a joke. The ambulance is coming. There's a trauma hawk coming. Okay. Now I'm in complete frantic mode with my 1-year-old son half asleep. I get up. I remember racing to the bedroom. I grabbed my phone charger. I grabbed, I think, like 2 random pairs of underwear. I wasn't even showered that day. I wasn't barely dressed. Like, our son was the worst sleeper in the world. So I was exhausted, like in just pure freak out mode, right? So I think I threw in a water bottle, 2 pairs of underwear, a phone charger, in a bag, got my son's diapers, wipes, everything, jumped in the car, dropped my son off with my in-laws, and raced to the first hospital. Now I'm on the phone with all kinds of people trying to figure out, how did this happen? Where is he? What is happening to him? Like, nobody could give me a straight answer other than he was seriously, seriously hurt. So, the hospital is about 45 minutes from where we live. So I was flying down the road to get there. And I happened to see a cop. And I was like, listen, my husband was hurt. Like, can you help me get through traffic? Can you help get me to the hospital? He turned his lights on for me and he got me through an intersection, and that was it. Then I was on my own. So raced 45-minute drive. I think I got there in like 20 minutes, all the way downtown. So I rushed through that hospital door, literally almost tackled by security guards, right? Tackled. I'm freaking out. Where's my husband? Where's my husband? John is my best friend, literally my best friend. We had the best marriage, the best relationship. We had so many goals and dreams together. I was frantic. Where is he? Finally, okay, nobody would speak to me. Nobody knew anything. They placed me with a pastor, right? So now I'm really freaking out. I'm put in this room. A pastor is watching over me, and I have nobody else with me. My phone is dying, trying to get a hold of our family. Friends start showing up, and now we're all freaking out, and I'm freaking out. I can't lose him. So he ended up being in surgery for probably a little over an hour, the longest hour of my life, right? They bring him out and they put him in post-op and they let me see him. And I have a couple friends around us and they hand me his wedding ring in a bag covered with grease. And when I looked at him, it was something that I will never forget. He had wires and tubes and a neck collar and completely covered in grease and grime and dirt, and nobody would tell me what happened to him. So at that point, he was already, had his emergency tracheostomy at the first hospital. Out of that surgery, they're now calling for another trauma hawk to come and get him. So once I find out he's going all the way down to Miami, I'm like, I'm not stable to drive. So his best friend actually drove me down there. But before we got in the car, I didn't want to let him go. And it's emotional talking about this because seeing him in such a condition where I was told that they needed to hurry or he wasn't going to make it, I didn't leave his side. I walked with them right out there to that second trauma hawk, and I literally helped them lift the gurney into the trauma hawk. And I begged and begged for them to let me ride with them. And they said there's not enough room in the trauma hawk. So that's when me and his friends got in the car and they raced me down there. And of course, now it was probably around 2 o'clock by the time we left the first hospital in West Palm. And then by the time we made it down to Miami, it was almost like 3 hours later because of traffic. So from what I was told, it only took 8 minutes, I believe, from that trauma hawk to get from the first hospital to the second hospital, which is about 2 hours from us. Then we hit so much traffic that day that we were stuck in it for about an extra hour. So then we finally make it to Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami, and we have no idea where he is. None. Nobody's called me. I have no idea. All I know is that there is a trauma center somewhere there. So we find a parking garage. And if any of you know, Jackson Memorial is part of University of Miami. So they're two different hospitals, but they're all related. And the campus is ginormous. Ginormous. They are absolutely phenomenal, have every specialty there. Excuse me, but ginormous. So we end up parking at a parking garage on the complete opposite side of campus because we were just also frantic to get there. And I'm screaming, let me out, let me out. Like, I need to find my husband. So I get out and I'm like screaming at people, running across this massive campus. Where is Ryder Trauma Center? Where is Ryder Trauma Center? And fortunately, the campus is so big, it's also a teaching hospital. So there are student residents everywhere. So I'm fortunate enough that there's workers walking all over that campus. I mean, there's a cafeteria, there's food everywhere, like so many medical buildings. So they're pointing, it's over there, run that way, you'll find it, you'll find it. So finally, after screaming at multiple people along the way, where's Ryder Trauma Center, Ryder Trauma Center? Finally, we find it. And I bust through that door and automatically they come to meet me. Are you John Pendleton's wife? And I said, yes. And immediately they hand me a proxy paper. And if you don't know what a proxy paper is, you are so lucky because I was 29 years old signing that proxy paper that stated all of his medical needs were basically in the palm of my hand. Anything he needed or they thought he needed was up to me to determine, to give them authorization because he was not able to for himself, because I found out he was in a coma. a medically induced coma. Finally, doctors started coming out and talking to me. And again, hi, I'm Tiffany. I'm a little bit crazy, but like I said, that was my best friend that they had in their care. So I wasn't going to take no for an answer. And I'm never the one to cause a scene, like, or be rude to medical professionals or anything like that. I just wanted to be by his side and see what they were doing to him, and for me to know the truth about what had happened to him, because still I didn't know. So you figure this happened at 11 a.m. and now it's almost probably like 6 p.m. at night. And from 11 to 6, 5 or 6, whatever it is, I just know that it was dark and it was just insane. And so all that time I had no idea what happened, what is wrong with him. So finally, I see that these doctors are coming out of a door, okay? This door doesn't open from the outside. I'm not able to just walk in there. Everybody's using a key to get in. Well, I got in that door and I walked my butt right into what's called recess. So recess in the trauma hospital is where the very, 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 very hurt people go. And they are all on top of you, working on you, getting you stable, assessing your wounds, calling whatever specialists that they need to come evaluate you. That is where all of the life-saving efforts happen. So they had found me in there watching them. And I remember being just posted up on a wall right in front of his room, arms by my side, and I am just watching them. I am not saying a word. I am just watching them. And then they realized that I wasn't going to do anything. I wasn't like that. And they let me stay there and watch them. And honestly, that is why I have so much respect, and we have so much respect for Jackson Memorial's Ryder Trauma Center, because they are truly not only there for the patient, but they are there for the families. So I stayed there and I watched for a few seconds. And those are just some memories that I will never forget of, watching him basically lifeless on another table, being evaluated by 20 people at one time. And they're just like throwing stuff everywhere and just all around him, assessing him. And then finally, I was told that, I need to go to the waiting room and I need to just wait for them to come give me some answers. So I don't even know how long after that it took for them to come give me some more answers about what was going on. But I just know that more friends now started showing up in Miami, and I finally wasn't alone. But man, I couldn't even think straight. I couldn't barely talk. Like, I was throwing up. I was dry heaving. I had a 1-year-old and a 9-year-old, and who was going to watch them? And we're 2 hours away from home. And oh my God, what if my husband doesn't make it? Or, I'm thinking the ultimate worst at the time. And so finally, doctors come out and they greet me and tell me that he's going up to the TICU. And so that stands for trauma ICU. And he is in a medically induced coma, that he was electrocuted by 4,160 volts of electricity to his brain, to the right side of his head, and it exited out the back of his neck. He had organs that were failing. He had air going down into his heart and his lung from his emergency tracheostomy at the first hospital. And they basically said, I needed to just hang tight until they got him situated, comfortable with medications, all of that. And I don't think I saw him the first night. I believe that it was just so chaotic with him that I had to wait until the very next morning to see him. And that's what I did. Is I remember So my mom doesn't live in this state. And when she heard, she automatically jumped on a plane and flew in. And my friends picked her up from the airport the very first night. She came to the hospital, and her and I sat in that hospital lobby all night long until the trauma ICU opened the next morning and they finally let me in to see him. And what I saw was absolutely devastating. Absolutely devastating. He had bandages all around his head, all around his neck. He still had the neck brace on, tubes from everywhere, IVs from everywhere. His emergency tracheostomy, he had aspirated, so they were pulling stuff out of his lungs, like just every machine that you can imagine possible, working on him to keep him comfortable and stable and in that induced coma so his body could heal. He was so extremely swollen, like unrecognizable. Like, we'll show you pictures one of these days about, everything he's been through and just show you guys some stuff. But like, it makes me so emotional because he was completely unrecognizable. So every single day, ICU opens and closes at certain times. And after that initial first day, I realized that I needed to remain as calm as possible. And every family that I meet that are going through something crazy or traumatic, I remind them, you need to be as calm as possible, or these doctors aren't going to want to deal with you, share with you all this information because they think you're going to freak out. So after the first night of meeting everybody, all the doctors and stuff, obviously for the next few days, more doctors would be called in from different specialties. We learned he had a skull fracture, a brain bleed, traumatic brain injury. They now are introducing me to the hospital psychologist who is preparing me for the worst, literally preparing me for a possible funeral in my brain. Just all kinds of crazy talk was made. I mean, it's just so crazy to relive now with you guys going on 4 years later. But yeah, his coma lasted 7 days. Being that he was electrocuted, like I said, you're electrocuted from the inside out. So they had to keep him comfortable, give him all the heavy medications, the fentanyl, all that, so his body could relax. He could stay in a calm state and his body could just try and heal before they can assess what kind of surgeries he needed. But during the initial 7 days, he did have 5 surgeries. So here's that proxy piece of paper. I'm 29 years old. Don't know what I'm signing for, what they're going to take him back and do to him. All I know is that that's me. I'm his wife. I'm his only one. So I signed it. And every single time I put my faith in these doctors, and I ended up making friends with them. I ended up, really putting my faith in them. And it's just incredible when you see pictures of how he first started to what he looks like now. And it's just unbelievable. But every day I would bring these doctors, nurses, coffee, pastries, cookies, brownies, cupcakes, all of it, like in the morning, in the night, because the trauma unit would close, the ICU would close at certain hours where they would bathe patients and debris patients, which if you're a burn survivor, they literally have to scrape your dead skin off of you every single day and prepare you for skin grafts or whatever you're going to need. So it would shut down for a couple hours every day, and then they would open back up. And of course, I would go sit with John, and being that I brought them all kinds of goodies, sometimes they would let me stay after hours just because they knew I would be calm and quiet, and I was just there to sit with him and hold his hand. So, yeah, I would play a lot of his favorite songs for him and just talk with him. There was a video of our son at our old house yelling for him, "Daddy, Daddy." And I remember one time I played that and he started to like move. So at that point, I knew he was still in there. And it was just so scary to go through. Back to the psychologist and, you know, neurosurgeons coming and cardiologists coming and pulmonology coming and ENT coming, every specialist under the sun, ophthalmology coming. His eye was so swollen, they had to cut it open to relieve the pressure. Like every specialist under the sun, he was seen by. And just crazy to think of how much he overcame, because as they're preparing me in that probably first 5 days, you know, for possible vegetative state, he won't be able to eat on his own. He won't be able to talk. He won't have any brain function. His memory is going to be gone. You know, he'll be paralyzed. They told me all of the worst things possible that could happen, you know, but they didn't know for sure until they woke him out of his coma. So crazy enough, that's why we're here, is because when he woke out of his coma, he beat all of the odds. He truly stunned everyone. And he hates to hear that he's a miracle. But for me, after hearing all of that negative stuff, you know, I was mentally prepared for every worst thing possible. And for him to be, you know, here today and had this miraculous recovery, it's unbelievable. So, yeah, like around day 5, and after 5 surgeries, obviously debriding him, his burns, removing the skin on his skull because he was electrocuted to his skull, taking a piece of his ear because his ear was charred from being electrocuted. I believe they might have done a skin graft from his own body during that time. I'm not sure. But it was just so much in the first week. So around day 5, they told me, okay, we're going to start trying to wake him up out of his coma. We're going to see how his pain levels are. He was at stroke level one time with his blood pressure was so high. So they would play around with it for the next 2 days. So between 5 and 7 days, they were just up and down with it, bringing him in and out of sedation. And by the 7th day, when they finally completely pulled him out of it, he didn't know who I was. He didn't know who he was. He didn't know who his kids were. He didn't know where he was. It scared the absolute crap out of me. It was absolutely devastating to see. And I knew that because he had a tracheostomy, he needed something to write on to be able to talk to us. So I got him a whiteboard with a dry erase marker, and he had nothing to say other that he wanted water, right? He wanted water because he couldn't drink anything, but no recollection of who we were. So day 8, my birthday, 30th birthday. We're in the trauma ICU. He's out of his coma. I walk in. What does he say on his whiteboard? Happy birthday. He remembered my birthday. He looked at the calendar on the wall and it came to him. He knew who I was. He knew who our kids were. Absolutely incredible. Just incredible. So everything that they had mentioned to me at that point, like, it was just so surreal that he was in such a better state than what they were anticipating and what I was anticipating. I couldn't handle that at 30 years old. Oh my God, you know? So he spent, I believe, we'll just say he spent a few more days after that in the ICU. And then, the kids were starting to come, and we actually brought them to the ICU to see him. And I remember putting like a bandana over his tracheostomy and around his head. And he obviously couldn't talk to them, but he had his whiteboard, and my daughter could read at the time. And it was just so bittersweet that he could see them finally and they could see him, because imagine being 1 in 9 and you haven't seen your dad in over a week, and all you know is he's in the hospital. Our daughter learned from a friend at school that her dad got hurt. No idea where I was, other than I was with him. But by then, our whole community knew he was hurt. And it was just, I keep saying it, crazy, but it was absolutely crazy. And you guys, you're not invincible. And that's why we're here, is to remind you, safety first. You're not invincible. Wives, girlfriends, I pray for you, because I know that you're scared every day when your blue collar workers leave. I know you're so incredibly nervous. You know how dangerous their jobs are. I feel for you. We are always going to be a blue collar family, and it absolutely sucks that we went through this. But just like him breaking out of that coma and, having this miracle that he's able to walk and talk and function somewhat normally, it's a miracle that now I'm given this opportunity to be here and start this podcast. Out of tragedies come blessings. And this podcast, I'm really hoping, will reach a lot of listeners, blue collar families, and we can help change some lives for those who have been injured and those who are still working. So that was basically brief synopsis of the first day, the first week or so of what happened. And from there, we would spend 2 months in the hospital, now move down to a step-down floor where we would have our own room, and I'd be able to stay with him. And once again, the doctors started to know me and trust me, that I wanted to learn how to take care of him, that I only had his best interest in mind, that I wasn't there to bother anybody, that, once again, I just wanted to sit back and watch, and I wasn't leaving him. So they allowed me to stay every single night with him. And we had a hotel around the corner where our children would come up on the weekends with family, and family who ended up coming down, they stayed at that hotel. And every now and then I would go back to the hotel, take a shower, go back to the hospital. Also had to keep stuff in the hotel for our children, diapers, wipes, stuff like that, for the little one. And anything that we needed stayed in the hotel, because there wasn't much room in the hospital. So it was just another home away from home, I guess. I had 2 homes in Miami for a little bit. But yeah, 2 months in the hospital initially. And in that 2 months, I believe he had, I want to say 8 surgeries in 2 months. So it was just nonstop. Obviously, well, not obviously, because you guys don't know on this new podcast, but after being electrocuted by 4,160 volts of electricity to the top of his head, I mentioned that they had to remove all the skin from the top of his head, right? So craziest surgery was them asking me, them not really asking me actually, but like telling me, asking me that they were going to consult Johns Hopkins Hospital about his head reconstruction. And at that point, I was so completely nauseated. Like, you guys don't know what to do here. You're a trauma hospital. Most of them said, we don't see people live after such horrific injuries, right? So they needed help from other people who may have been through it, done these kinds of surgeries. So they braced us for the last surgery that he would have on his stay there at Jackson Memorial's Ryder Trauma Center during that time. Obviously, we've been back for plenty more surgeries and treatments and stuff like that, but that was the last surgery during that 2-month initial stay. And that surgery would be where they took his latissimus dorsi muscle from his back, which is actually your lat muscle on your back. It's yay big. Everybody's built differently, but it's yay big. And they used it as a head flap to cover his skull. But that was only after they drilled holes in his skull. So maybe after the first month is when we actually saw what his skull looked like after they took all the skin off. And being that they're a learning hospital, teaching hospital, they're going to try new things, and completely fine with us. It was a learning experience for all, but they drilled holes all over his skull, right? Little burr holes is what they're called. And they were probably the size of a dime all over his head. I mean, like not even a half an inch apart, right? So when they came back to us after that surgery where they drilled the holes, they said, okay, we're going to give it a couple weeks now. We're going to water his head every day like a plant, okay? Pour water on it, saline, solution. So that now became my job, pouring solution on his head every single day in this hospital to make sure now the holes that they drilled under all the gauze stays wet so that the solution can actually moisturize the tissue that grows under your skull or through your skull. Okay, I'm not a doctor. I don't really understand all this, and it was 4 years ago. So reliving all of this is whatever. So yeah, watering his head like a plant every day for a few weeks to see if the tissue would grow through his skull so that he wouldn't need his lat muscle as a head flap. But like I already said, fast forward a couple weeks, we learned that it was growing after watering. All the tissue was filling some holes, but not all of them. So they had told us if we decided that we wanted to do this the natural way, which is keep watering every day, hang out in that hospital room. You can't go outside. He was going crazy at that point. I was going crazy at that point. That we would be there for about a year doing that process of watering every day and just waiting for his body to naturally do its thing. And together we decided that that's not an option for us, that what that next year sitting in that hospital could do to us mentally and emotionally, physically, it wasn't worth it. So we opted back to that idea with Johns Hopkins and this whole lat muscle situation. They took out his lat muscle from his back, huge scar, okay? His scar is probably more than 12 inches long, and that's where they cut it out. He had what's called JP tubes. So they're these little balls with strings. You may have seen them before, and they collect your blood that's draining after a surgery. After that surgery, he had those also inside of him, and they placed it on his head. So they warned us after they placed it on his head that his head was going to be big. And they were not lying. His head was very big, very big. It did not fit in a hat. It barely fit in a beanie. His head was probably like, I can't even show you. It was big. We'll show you pictures one day. And they said, okay, it's done. Now we're going to come in for the next week and we're going to use a Doppler. If you know what a Doppler is, it listens to heartbeats for babies. So when a mother's pregnant, so they used a Doppler, and I believe it's your artery from the side of your face, they had to stretch over to the other side of his face so that the muscle on his head would be able to get blood flow, if I'm telling you all this correctly. So the Doppler came in where they would listen to a different couple spots of his head for that blood flow. And it sounds just like a baby's heartbeat in the very beginning of a baby like growing. So every day they would come in and they'd put it on a couple parts of his new muscle on his head, and they would listen for blood flow because they were terrified. You know, there weren't very many options for reconstructing his head if that muscle failed. Thank goodness it worked. Once again, miracles are made at Jackson. We love our Ryder trauma family so much. So plastic surgery went amazing, but it was big. So over the next year, they said it's going to shrink. Just like any muscle in your body, if you don't use it for a long time, it's going to shrink. So crazy long year, John looking in the mirror, hating himself, hating how he looked, terrified. We'd go in public, people would stare. Like, he had lost his ear also during that surgery. So in the initial days, you know, I told you his ear was charred and they took a piece off. We had to wait and see if his ear was going to kind of like revive itself. It didn't. It completely died. So they also took his ear off as well. So now, you know, fast forward, we're home and he's healing and I'm doing all his wound care, bandage changes, everything. We're trying to go out in public and live a normal life again, and people would stare. And it was so incredibly just annoying and sad that adults and humans can make such faces and stare at him and looks of disgust and just complete shock on these people's faces. It was horrible. I made him a shirt that said, I made me a shirt that said, "Didn't your mother teach you not to stare?" And I wore it everywhere. I had it made in every single color and I wore it everywhere. And most people would get the hint when I would look at them, you know, give them that side eye, like my daughter says, and you know, just the look of death. How dare you look at a person like that with injuries? You can clearly see, you know, something's going on and you're going to make it more noticeable. But anyways, what we've been through, we don't want anybody to go through. And that's why we're here. And so, yeah, over the last 4 years, there's so much to share with you guys. And like I said, John remembers his coma. He remembers waking out of most of his surgeries and the excruciating pain he went through. He had to go to rehab at one point, a couple hours away, just so much stuff. And still, being the month of September, he's struggling with his PTSD and mental state because for some reason, every year this time, it just comes back to him. He doesn't remember how this happened to him. He doesn't remember feeling how this happened to him. Thank goodness all of that is erased from his brain. But for some reason, something just happens in his brain where this time of year, he just can't handle it. And he doesn't even know why. But it's just like that seasonal depression, seasonal extra PTSD, I like to call it. The nightmares start coming back from his coma, just weird emotions running around and lots of anxiety. So there's so much to share with you guys and talk about who we were before this and what our goals are, hopefully now in life. As you can see, I'm trying to bring some positivity to our family and give him a purpose again that he can go on and help other people, because we love helping other people. It's what we've always done. And this is going to help us too, I feel like, sharing our story finally. And although we'll never really move on, it would be nice to just keep taking steps forward and beat this mental health issue that we have going on. So I feel like we are going to be able to hopefully achieve that by connecting with you guys, and hopefully having some viewers contact me, reach out, want to share your stories, talk about where you work today, because hey, like I said, we're always going to be blue collar. I'm always going to be a blue collar wife, no matter what. And he misses his job. He loves talking with blue collar men and women about what they do. So don't think by you reaching out that, you know, we're not going to like what you do for work or whatever. We want to hear all of it. We're interested in all of it. We support all of you. Thank you guys for listening. It's bittersweet being here, and especially during this 4th year. So I'll be back.